In today's video, a moment of petty rivalry escalated into murder, aided by a homemade gun that looked more like bad plumbing than a weapon. One young man died and 4 others ruined their lives, and a town learned that idiocy can be bloody lethal. This is Curios&Spiritual. We take a look at the case, the police investigation, and the trial. Lewis Williams was 20 years old, which is roughly the age when people are meant to be figuring out what to do with their lives, not losing them on a public road in a hail of shotgun pellets. But on the 11th of January 2021, in the unassuming South Yorkshire town of Mexborough, that is exactly what happened. It began as these things often do, not with a single spark, but with a slow burning fuse. For months before that Monday, there had been tension in the area between groups of young men, one cluster loosely associated with Doncaster, another with Sheffield's Pittsmore district, sometimes referred to as the PSP, or Pittsmore Shotter Boys. These names, which sound faintly ridiculous outside their local context, carried a weighty significance for the young men involved. The idea of belonging, defending honour, or retaliating for perceived slights seemed to have replaced any rational concept of adulthood. Lewis Williams was, according to multiple reports, seen by his killers as aligned with this rival faction. In truth, he was mostly just a young man navigating life in a post-industrial town where opportunity had been on decline since the coalfields had closed. But in the paranoid logic of gang rivalry, that was enough to make him a target. On the morning of the 11th of January, the day's cast of would-be villains assembled their props. The 4, Taylor Meanley, Jack Parks, Joe Anderton, and Arlene Nika, were not exactly criminal masterminds. They were young, impulsive, and crucially, armed with a sense of grievance. Their mission that day, it seems, was not to achieve anything productive, but to assert dominance in the most destructive way available to them. They obtained a car, a stolen light blue Jaguar XE, because nothing says discretion like driving around a small town in a high-end saloon that doesn't belong to you. The vehicle was stolen from Sheffield and had false plates. Inside it were Meanley, then 17 years old, Parks, 21 years old, who drove, Anderson, 18 years old, and Nika, 16 years old. A team of 4 with the collective wisdom of 1. Their weapon of choice was no standard issue firearm, but an improvised shotgun, the sort of contraption that looks like it was designed in a shed by someone with access to a plumber's toolkit and too much YouTube, with too little supervision. A so-called slam gun, it consisted of 2 metal tubes, a firing pin, and a questionable understanding of physics. Meanly, the eventual triggerman would later claim he thought it only fired blanks. It did not. Before the shooting, the group busied themselves with other forms of petty intimidation. Earlier that day, Meanley, Nika and Anderton had been involved in cornering a teenager, believed to be friendly with Williams. They assaulted him and demanded to know if he was part of the PSB gang. This impromptu interrogation, carried out on a residential street, was recorded in part on CCTV, because if you're going to commit a series of escalating crimes, you might as well make sure they're well documented. Still not content, the group proceeded to a house on Clayfield View, a property allegedly connected to some minor act of vandalism involving Meanley's car. There, Parks and Meanley threw bricks at the windows, ensuring that by lunchtime they were already wanted for multiple offences. It was a bit of an industrious day for the 4 young men, who might otherwise have been at work, college, or asleep. By the afternoon, their focus shifted back to Lewis Williams. Whether through local gossip, phone messages, or sheer misfortune, they learned of his whereabouts. Williams was on Wath Road in Mexborough, standing near a convenience shop with a couple of acquaintances. It was broad daylight, around 4:25 PM, the sort of time that people are finishing work, kids are out playing, or people nip into the shops buying dinner, not anticipating a drive-by execution. The stolen Jaguar cruised past once, slowly. Witnesses later described it performing a U-turn further down the road, before coming back. Parks was at the wheel, Meanley in the front passenger seat, the makeshift shotgun balanced in his hands. The car pulled up alongside Williams. Parks allegedly shouted, "Shoot him." and meanly did. The weapon discharged at close range. The crude nature of the firearm meant it scattered pellets widely. But its effects were devastatingly concentrated. Over 100 shotgun pellets tore into Lewis Williams' neck and chest. He fell to the pavement almost instantly. His friends ran. The Jaguar sped away. The whole event took seconds. Bystanders, hearing what they first thought was a firework, rushed over. When they saw the extent of Williams' injuries, the illusion shattered. Someone called 999. Paramedics arrived quickly, but the wounds were unsurvivable. Lewis Williams was pronounced dead at the scene. Meanwhile, the 4 fugitives in the Jaguar embarked on what might be generously called an escape attempt. They did not get far. The car was soon abandoned and torched, whether out of panic, incompetence, or both. The group scattered. Police quickly pieced together their identities from CCTV footage, witness descriptions, and a helpful trail of digital arrogance. Social media posts and messages in which meanly had bragged about guns and getting rid of rivals. As criminal self-promotion goes, it was remarkably thorough. News of the shooting spread quickly through Mexborough, a town accustomed to economic hardship, but not to gangland theatrics. Residents were appalled. Floral tributes appeared at the scene, and the phrase drive-by shooting entered the local lexicon, with grim immediacy. This was not an anonymous city crime, but a killing carried out in full view of everyday life. School children, shopkeepers, neighbours walking dogs. Behind the lurid headlines, the killing illustrated something depressingly familiar. The men involved were barely adults. Their motives were incoherent. The target was not some shadowy rival drug baron, but a 20-year-old local lad who happened to be in the wrong place, at the wrong intersection of vendetta and stupidity. For the 4 in the Jaguar, it was a point of no return. In their own skewed hierarchy of street respect, they had scored a grim kind of victory. In reality, they'd sealed their fate, ensured that a family, a community, and their own futures were shattered in the process. As evening fell, police cordons sealed off Wath Road. Blue lights flickered against terraced houses, and forensic teams began the meticulous, joyless work of marking evidence. In those details of the numbered markers lay the truth, the aftermath of what had happened. What happened on Wath Road was not the work of masterminds or hardened criminals. It was instead the fatal consequence of young men treating life like a game they could not lose. Until they did. The instant the first 999 call came through, reporting a male shot on Wath Road, South Yorkshire police found themselves in the unenviable position of investigating a daylight execution in a small town where everyone either saw something or swore they didn't. They collected DNA swabs, footprints, fibres and crucially CCTV footage from every nearby shop, petrol station and doorbell camera they could get their hands on. Mexborough may not have many cultural landmarks, but it does have cameras. The footage turned out to be a godsend. Within hours, investigators traced the vehicle involved, a light blue Jaguar XE with a missing front badge and stolen plates. The car had been seen performing that fateful U-turn, then speeding away moments after the shot. The footage gave police both a timeline and a starting point. The Jaguar, as it happened, had been reported stolen days earlier from Sheffield. Its journey from city to small town now formed the backbone of the inquiry. For days, officers combed through mobile phone data, automatic number plate recognition hits, and social media activity, slowly piecing together the web of idiocy that led to the killing. CCTV from the petrol station in Goldthorpe showed the same Jaguar arriving hours before the shooting. Inside were 4 males, Parks, Beadley, Anderton and Nika, a veritable who's who of future defendants. Cameras also caught them buying drinks and snacks, because even budding gunmen get peckish. That footage, timestamped and crystal clear, would later form part of the prosecution's timeline. Forensics meanwhile confirmed that witnesses suspected the fatal shot came from a homemade firearm. When detectives eventually recovered the weapon, the remains of it inside the Jaguar that was abandoned and torched, they found a crude yet effective piece of plumbing, repurposed for murder. The slam gun, as it was later described in court, fired standard 12-gauge cartridges and required only a crude striking motion to discharge. No trigger, no safety catch, no brains. Officers examining the digital lives of local youths found a string of posts and messages by Taylor Meanley, the youngest of the group, that could have been written by someone desperate to be arrested. He had uploaded photos of the slam gun days earlier, along with boastful captions referencing local rivalries. He'd also messaged friends about getting rid of PSB lads. Not exactly subtle. These snippets of bravado were duly captured, time-stamped, and entered into the growing wall of evidence. Arrests followed swiftly. Parks was picked up first at an address in Mexborough, looking less confident than he had beyond the wheel. Meanly, the gunman was arrested soon after. Anderson and Nika were tracked down days later. Each was interviewed separately under caution, each trying with varying degrees of creativity to explain how they coincidentally ended up in a stolen car near a shooting they knew nothing about. By late spring 2021, the investigation was effectively wrapped. Detectives had 4 defendants, and a stack of evidence thicker than a phone directory. By the time of the case of Parks, Meanley, Anderton and Nika reached court, nobody was pretending this was going to be a mystery. The prosecution had CCTV, phone records, social media evidence, and a homemade shotgun. The defence had explanations, some inventive, some implausible, all bloody desperate. The jury was shown CCTV footage of the Jaguar making its slow, deliberate pass down Wath Road. They heard how Parks shouted "shoot him" just before Meanley leaned out with the weapon. They saw images of the homemade shotgun, a crude device that looked more like a plumbing accident than a firearm, and heard how experts who confirmed it was, unfortunately, lethal. When it came time for the defence, things grew more theatrical. Parks, the driver, claimed he hadn't known Meanley would actually fire the weapon. He thought they were simply out for a confrontation. In his telling, he was merely the chauffeur for a tense conversation, the kind that apparently requires a loaded shotgun and a stolen car. Meanley's defence hinged on his alleged misunderstanding of physics. He admitted firing the weapon, but said he thought it contained blank cartridges, that he just wanted to scare Lewis Williams. It was an argument that he asked the jury to believe that a 17-year-old had somehow built and obtained a homemade shotgun, brought it to a rival street and fired it at point-blank range from a car window, all while assuming no one could possibly get hurt. The courtroom silence during this claim said more than the prosecution ever could. The jury retired, deliberated, perhaps unsurprisingly found Meanley and Parks guilty of murder, while Anderton and Nika were convicted of manslaughter. Sentencing came next, and it was grimly inevitable. Meanley, the gunman, was handed life imprisonment with a minimum term of 27 years. Parks, the driver, received life with a minimum term, also of 27 years. Anderton got 12 years. Nika also got 12 years for manslaughter. The numbers varied, but the outcome was the same. 4 young lives effectively over before they began. In his remarks, the judge called the killing a gangland execution that terrorised an entire community. He described the group as arrogant and reckless, and noted their actions had turned a quiet Yorkshire town into a crime scene that wouldn't soon be forgotten. He also reserved particular condemnation for Meanley, calling him a young man who glorified violence and was proud of it. And so in the end, everything returned to its proper order. The dead buried, the guilty imprisoned, and the headlines faded beneath newer tragedies. Police moved on to their next investigation, and 4 young men who mistook violence for validation began long sentences, courtesy of His Majesty's Prison Service. The story of Lewis Williams is not at heart a story about gangs, or guns, or even justice. It's about the human talent for turning petty resentment into catastrophe. These were not professional killers, they were amateurs with Wi-Fi and excess of pride. Their crime was not sophisticated, but it was perfectly stupid, a textbook reminder that intelligence and intent are often strangers. The investigation and trial brought a closure of a kind, but not sense. There's nothing to understand about killing someone over social media taunts and postcode pride. It's utterly insane. If Shakespeare had written it, critics would have accused him of exaggeration. What remains is a grim arithmetic. 1 young man dead, 4 in prison, and a community left wondering how so little could destroy so much. In the end, the case of Lewis Williams is proof that tragedy no longer requires grandeur. It doesn't need kings or wars. just a car, a gun, and a handful of boys who thought reputation was worth a life. Justice, as ever, arrived late, tidy and unsatisfying. The lesson, if there was one to be scraped from this, is that stupidity with a weapon will always find its mark.